How about that for an intro?
Oh man, I'm so pumped. It just really got me psyched up. Hopefully everybody watching feels the same way. So great to be with you.
Thank you, Dr. McCullough. Peter McCullough is in the house today, ladies and gentlemen. So happy to have you here. Truly honored. You are taking time out of your very busy schedule, I know, to be here and give us some insight really on, I guess, where you've been, where you're fighting, where you're helping people, and give us some insight on the system that we are all up against as physicians, and even provide education to patients who are navigating this complex system.
Boy, I think everybody has found themselves, I guess, amidst some form of controversy over the last now 6 years. But by introduction, I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm in practice as an internist, a cardiologist. I'm a trained epidemiologist. I'm currently in private practice in Dallas, both internal medicine and cardiology, board certified. And I'm also the chief scientific officer of the Wellness Company, an emerging alternative healthcare company really for the world. I'm also president of the McCullough Foundation. That's a not-for-profit organization that has activities with respect to investigative scholarship, big presence in the media, involved in justice in the courts, and also in public policy.
Wonderful. Wow. Talk about a resume. That's incredible. So we have a lot to talk about today, and I think before we get started, I'm going to do something maybe another host hasn't done, maybe so, but I want to take us back to little baby McCullough, and I want to get a sense of where you grew up, what your formative years were like, and what sort of directed you into this position of being a physician.
Well, it's a terrific question. I think anybody contemplating this whole field, to be a doctor, and there's 10 different types of doctors. A lot of people don't know that. People think of an MD or DO, but we go, DC, doctor of chiropractic, right? And we go down doctor of philosophy and pharmacology, etc. But I think when I was born, when I came out of the womb, I wanted to be a doctor. I didn't consider anything else. No one in my family had done it before. My family is an Irish immigrant family. And I was born up in the north, up in western New York State. As a kid, moved down to Texas in the 70s, graduated from high school from Grapevine.
Okay.
Back in the day, most kids went back on the farms after they graduated from high school. I went on to Baylor University, undergrad, University of Texas Southwestern. I finished top in my class clinically, and then went on to University of Washington in Seattle, and then had a period of time where I served in rural health. So I did basically a tour of public health for 3 years. The third year of that, I got my master's of public health at the University of Michigan, went on for cardiology training at what's now the Oakland University William Beaumont School of Medicine. And then I held leadership positions. Quickly became a program director in cardiovascular diseases at Henry Ford, then chief of cardiology at the University of Missouri. And then I think the highest rank I had was the chief academic and scientific officer for Ascension Health, the St. John Providence Health Ministry in Southeast Michigan. So I was essentially like a dean. I had over 3,000 doctors who I was responsible for, the chief medical officers, all the educational programs. So I ascended the ranks. I became full professor of medicine, was recruited down here to Dallas for the kind of latter part of my career, which I think turned out really well because my son ultimately was able to follow my footsteps and went to Baylor undergrad, then University of Texas at Houston, became an MD. Now he's finishing training in Pittsburgh in ER medicine. And most importantly, coming back to Dallas, I played really a critical role looking after my senior parents.
Wow, very good. So for those of you who don't know who Dr. McCullough is, the few of you who don't know, he is and was perhaps the most outspoken physician during the COVID era in direct resistance, really, to the tyranny that was those years. And did I get that? I think I got that correct.
Well, tyranny, it almost sounds like there was some type of political terror that reigned on the population, and I became a resistance fighter.
That's my perspective.
That's a good way to put it.
Absolutely.
I mean, you almost made me sound like I was Luke Skywalker or something, going against the dark side. But I never characterized myself as particularly courageous. I'm conservative. I don't take risks. I'm careful in what I do. My wife and I were careful in raising our kids, and I found myself essentially thrown into the limelight.
Well, and it's not like you were looking for it. I mean, you were just going about your business as usual. And in fact, for those of you who wonder why somebody of this stature is on this little guy's show, I was actually a medical student of yours just about 11 years ago, if I recall.
Right.
And our first encounter, actually, you were pimping me. For those of you who don't know what that means, you can look it up. But you were pimping me on the chambers of the heart. And so, man, those were simpler days back then. But
pimping,
yes.
I haven't heard that word in a long time.
I'm trying to hold my laugh.
No. But pimping, what's interesting is one of the things that we grade students and residents on is what's called fund of knowledge. Like, how much do you know about medicine? Mm-hmm. And it was a few years after you, I had this student, and he really, really kind of wanted to mix it up with me. And I was really grilling him, on biochemical pathways. We were at the chalkboard. And he said, Dr. McCullough, hold on. He says, I don't need to know any of this. I said, really?
Mm-mm.
He says, no, I don't need to know this at all. Mm-hmm. He says, I just need to know where to find it. I need to know where to access the information. I don't need to memorize it.
Right.
And he kind of opened up my eyes to things, Since you and I intersected, do you know the medical database is doubling about every 2 years now?
Wow.
It used to be every 7 years. And how can the human brain continue to try to expand and catalog all this information?
No.
So in a way, he was right. And
that's why we subspecialize.
Right. But he would look things up on his phone, and I was saying, well, what methylates to this? And he could just zip on his phone. Nowadays, we would use artificial intelligence.
Right. Yep. That's true. Do you think this is a little off topic, but do you think artificial intelligence is coming for our jobs, or do you think it's going to just enhance our ability?
It's going to enhance our ability. Yeah. I'm already using it now.
Yeah.
It's so useful. I had a complex patient recently with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, CLL. We pressed with some additional mutations. He wanted to know, listen, doc, am I done for, or can I enjoy my retirement? A pretty important question. And with advanced mutations, I plugged them all into AI. It searched all the databases, gave a wonderful outlook on his prognosis. I could have gotten to that answer, but it would have taken days and searches and with other patients bearing down.
Right.
I had it right there in front of me. I use artificial intelligence every day. Now, at the McCullough Foundation, we did craft a strategic relationship with a particular AI company. It's called Alter AI. So Alter hyphen AI. And it's unique because it doesn't have any pre-programmed bias.
Oh, okay.
So what I mean by bias, you can tell that if artificial intelligence is biased by asking it a question. You can ask it, what are the fatal side effects of the COVID-19 vaccine? That's all you want to know. Mm-hmm. And you'll get something, but it'll say, but they're safe and effective, or but it's very rare. It's like, no, I didn't ask you that. I just So Alter AI does not have that pre-programmed bias. The other thing to look for in artificial intelligence is look for the sources that it uses. So, for instance, one bogus source of information is factcheck.org. If you see AI hitting that as a site, you know you have a bad AI program, because it's a biased organization that's at the Annenberg Foundation in University of Pennsylvania, funded by Gates Foundation. It's a vaccine promotional unit. So all they do is promote vaccines. So they review all these things, and they check all these facts, but 100% of the time, their fact-checking finds the vaccines are safe and effective, and anybody who is counter to that is spreading misinformation.
Right.
100% of the time, right? So there's no balance. There's never been a review that they've done to say, well, maybe there's an issue here. So factcheck.org, that one's out. Another one is MedPage Today. You know that one? Mm-hmm. That's a physician organization newsletter. And again, 100% of the time, they are promoting the vaccines, all forms of vaccines, and anybody in their way. In medicine, there's always a balance, right?
There's nuance.
The drugs we prescribe, the surgeries that are done, the interventions. There's always some pros and some cons. So when things are 100% on one side,
exactly,
there's bias.
Couldn't have said it better. And I think that's what was throwing up the flags for me during that early COVID time, because there were so many absolutes and there was no room to ask a question to the contrary of what their narrative was. And so right away, I'm like, well, this doesn't seem right. Thinking back during my time in med school, even, I remember this was, many years before COVID, and there was a lecture about the coronavirus, an hour-long lecture. But I remember that for, going into the pandemic. And that lecture, the person giving the lecture said, you know what? We have a flu vaccine. Imagine if we had the capability of making a coronavirus vaccine, because it's always been around. It will always be around. And, I don't think a lot of people understand that too. It's like COVID came out of nowhere and it's still here. Why is it still here? Well, it's always going to be here. But the presenter was saying, yeah, if only we could. It's not a matter of technology. It's a matter of physics. It just continues to replicate and change, and the vaccines can't keep up with it. Mm-hmm. So when they're saying, oh, hey, we got a vaccine, like, what was it, 6 months after the outbreak, something to that nature?
Yeah.
Pretty close. They were like saying, well, wait a minute, I thought that was impossible. Tell me more.
Well, I think the timing was from the time Trump declared a national emergency, it was 5 days where Moderna said, we have a vaccine.
Was it that soon?
5 days.
Okay.
And then April 1st, now this is in my book that's behind you, Courage to Face COVID-19. In this book, we highlight Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates is a philanthrocapitalist. People know him for, Microsoft and his corruption, corrupt business practices that literally ousted him. And so he formed the Gates Foundation, but he didn't change his ways. And so he heavily invested in vaccines. So he invested in the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine before it was going to be known that it was going to be producing messenger RNA vaccines. So Bill Gates comes out on April 1st, 2020, and he says, the world won't go back to normal until everyone takes a COVID-19 vaccine. Well, how does he know? The vaccines aren't developed then. They're not even tested then.
Yeah.
How did he know? Now fast forward, who he's working with? Jeffrey Epstein.
Right. And somehow he's still walking free. So I guess that'll catch up at some point. No, it's definitely a crazy time. And so, you were very outspoken about this, certainly. And you've spoken on the difference many times between the concept of science, the difference between discovery and using science as an institutional authority. Trust the science has now become a common social media argument, and certainly a slogan even for those years. You have more than 1,000 publications, 685 citations in the School of Medicine library, the National Library of Medicine. How would someone in your position define what is science?
Science is a process. It's a process that involves observation, hypothesis testing, design of a research approach, collecting information, and then ultimately analyzing and making a conclusion. So science is a process. Nobody owns it. Nobody has agency over science. So a couple of examples where we knew the hubris was far out of control. At one moment, Anthony Fauci said, anybody who's attacking science attacks me. I represent science.
I am science. Yeah,
I am science. Another one closer to us here is Dr. Peter Hotez in Houston. Now, Hotez is junior to me academically. And yet, I was a frequent media commentator on Fox and OAN and Real America's Voice. He was one of the commentators for CNN. And he started an entire lecture series on this. In fact, he went to universities around the country in Texas. And he said the dangerous rise of anti-science. Anti-science. So there's science and there's anti-science. So I took a look at his platform, and everything that he says is science. Everything that disagrees with him is anti-science.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
So this is a form of leverage. In fact, anti-science is one of 6 propaganda terms. Probably everybody listening, we should go through this. You want to recognize propaganda in this time, because propaganda is a tool that people use to gain leverage over one another. They use it to, in a sense, grab moral superiority, to put somebody down while they push themselves up. That's what propaganda does, pressing their views onto somebody else. So the first one is misinformation. Misinformation. I never even heard that word. Do you know it came on the scenes in 2021, 2020, like gangbusters? It became, by 2021, it became a mesh term in the National Library of Medicine. It's a scientific term. Do you know that Oxford has a misinformation index that it can judge you? And when we look back on it, it came into the English language around 1500. It was 1800. It started to become more widely used, and then it really went wild in Nazi Germany with Goebbels, the Office of Propaganda. Mm-hmm. So essentially, anybody who disagreed with the Third Reich was spreading misinformation.
Right.
Okay, so immediately then they could create misinformation policies. Well, you're spreading misinformation. We need to prosecute you for this. Well, the same thing happened in COVID. The American Board of Internal Medicine created a misinformation policy, then prosecuted people. The next term is disinformation. Now, disinformation, a slight variation of it, but who used that? Stalin in post-World War II Russia. You could be accused of spreading disinformation, and the new communist regime could come after you. The third one is malinformation. Then there's anti-science, which we've covered. Anti-vaxxer.
Yep.
Anti-vaxxer. Wait. Vaccines are just, you're not pro-vaxxer or anti-vaxxer. That's like saying you're a pro-ACE inhibitor or anti-ACE inhibitor person. It's just another thing. Vaccines are another tool we use in medicine. Yeah. But this anti-vaxxer became this pejorative propaganda term. And then the last one, conspiracy theorists. Conspiracy. There's nothing wrong with coming up with theories, and there's nothing wrong with conspiracy. It means you work together. So the best way to handle that is to say, listen, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a rational theorist. I have rational thoughts and theories like we all do, and we should be able to discuss them. But these 6 propaganda terms are used to shut down people. Going to shut you down. So let's go over them again. Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, anti-science, anti-vaxxer, and conspiracy theorists. So we should always recognize these propaganda terms. I don't use them. So I've never accused anybody of spreading misinformation. That no two people have the same exact views. Each person's views are equally recognized, and we should discuss them.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's definitely, all those terms are just so easily thrown around. And I almost wonder if it's because maybe the general population doesn't want to believe that there could be a bigger truth. I mean, it's so easy to just turn on the news and say, oh, well, that's what's happening. Click,
well, you bring up a good point. In today's world, what we have is we just have clickbait. Mm-hmm. So somebody can take a picture of something and then say, well, this represents this, without any verification. You know what I mean? Have you ever seen this? Well, this represents this. And I always wonder, is this real? Is it not? You know, it came up recently. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but my wife brought it up. I came home. Have you seen the story about Kristi Noem's husband, Byron Noem? Have you seen? Now, she was our head of Homeland Security. Right. Her husband, to me, I always thought he was a stand-up guy. He's a professed Christian and what have you. Well, there's pictures of him wearing large fake women's breasts and taking, doofy pictures in the mirror or something like this. And then it says, pictures of Kristi Noem's husband surface cross-dressing. The first thing that came to my mind is it just Photoshopped?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, who knows nowadays?
Right. Have you done AI in yourself?
Oh, of course. Wait, on myself?
Yeah.
I have.
And?
Aging and everything.
Oh.
Yeah.
Down to the baby.
And what do you think? It looks pretty.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's scary.
It is.
So Alex Jones told me that somebody did an AI of Tucker Carlson's voice calling him, and he couldn't tell the difference.
Wow. Yeah.
So AI can create images of us. They can clearly replicate our voices. And so I think we should always question. And you know what, Dustin? It emphasizes there's no substitute for the face-to-face.
Yep.
There's no substitute for reading a print book. It's not fake. You can actually read it. It's not altered. Anything else can be altered on the internet, and certainly with artificial intelligence.
There's definitely a movement, I think, in the youth, as they refer to themselves these days, going back to physical media. CDs, tape players, there's a nostalgia there. There's more interest. I think the idea of subscribing to iTunes and constantly paying Netflix, and then if you stop paying, you lose all of your content, it's sort of wearing, I think, on the younger generations.
Wow, interesting observation. Yeah. My daughter is just the 1 or 2 years ahead of or after Gen Z. Mm-hmm. So my daughter's 30. And it's funny you mentioned it because, one of her treasures is the old LP record turntable.
Yeah, right. Treasure, key word.
Yeah.
Exactly. I want to close back a little bit on what people think science is before we move on to the next topic. A lot of people think science just means randomized, double-blinded, controlled trials. But really, historically, medicine has relied on observation, clinical judgment, and certainly I think during the early part of COVID, there was perhaps some concern with the safety and efficacy of certain treatments that were being promoted. We didn't really have time even at that time to develop really, large-scale studies. So I think you were seeing this just on a clinical level, an observational level, and that's what got the ball started.
Mm-hmm. There's always been a critical role for observation in what's called empiricism. Remember when a new problem pops up, in this case a pandemic virus, no one knows what to do. There is no established foundation. There's no fund of knowledge. And so the very first doctor who attempted to treat a patient and to help them in some way established what's called the community standard of care. The community standard of care initially is established by empiric treatment. And it evolves over time. Doctors find what's successful, what's not. Patients give them feedback. And then we mature. And then we get somewhere between 5 and 20 years on a problem. We do have large prospective, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials. But they don't appear out of the ether. And they're certainly not pre-made for us for problems. And then it's very important to understand that even when we have a large trial, it's something we integrate in our clinical practice, but it rarely directs us. And this is what I mean. So, it's been analyzed that if you take any patient with any problem, the patient's so sufficiently complex that within a few steps in their history, we don't have any randomized trials that apply to them.
That is such a good point. Go ahead. I'm going to finish.
Here's an example. So there's a patient, and the patient has had a kidney transplant, and he has coronary artery disease, and he's on drugs that are lipid lowering, but now he has a low testosterone, and we want to know, will the low testosterone reduce or increase his risk of coronary heart disease? No randomized trials that actually match that patient subtype. That happens all the time. So randomized trials they don't define community standard of care. They never do. There's something we can integrate. They're great to have. Randomized trials do something that nothing else can do. It's very important. They control for all known and unknown sources of confounding, and they also control for selection bias. That is, the doctor or the patient selecting their treatment. Mm-hmm. And because they handle those two, they elevate in terms of level of evidence, but they never dictate what we do.
Right. Exactly. And I can't think of a better example also for the pain management world. When you think about the subjectivity of pain itself, even as something as simple as epidural steroid injections, there's been sort of a growing movement to eliminate them from the treatment protocol.
Really?
Simply because the people looking at the numbers, they see, well, there's 9 million injections. Maybe they only cost $100 each injection, but across 9 million, and then they don't see that there's curing or long-lasting functional improvement, that type of thing. But the subjectivity of it, especially when you look at the studies, I mean, you have to consider not only are the patients perhaps not reporting their pain the same, because it is a subjective report, physicians' expectations, multiple confounding, where they're going in the spine for the injection is also a consideration, the skill level of the injector, and then who's agreeing on what a meaningful outcome is. Perhaps if we do an injection in the clinic, but it only gets you 2 months, but hey, it gets you to your child's wedding next month, and we can avoid surgery for another 6 months, I would say that's a win for a relatively low risk, low cost procedure. But unfortunately, not everybody looks at it like that.
Well, fair point. You reminded me of a famous vignette where there's a young person like you has a terrible car accident and is now paralyzed in a wheelchair. And they do an assessment, subjective quality of life. And it's your first day in the wheelchair, and say, hey, will you fill out this quality of life survey? And they fill it out and say, my life stinks. It's horrible. I can't walk. I'm stuck in this wheelchair. I've got to have a Foley catheter, or somebody needs to help me on the toilet. It just couldn't be worse. And you take that same person with that same disability, and a year later have them fill out the same quality of life survey. It's like, well, it's not so bad. So the point is people adapt, right? And so quality of life is called, the term we use is called PRO, patient-reported outcomes. Quality of life is challenging because people always keep adjusting the baseline.
Yes, that's true. Even for people who don't have disabilities, let's say they're living, just your expectation of what your life trajectory is going to change your quality of life. It's all perception. And of course, we have multiple studies for folks going into a particular procedure. If they have a positive expectation of that procedure, chances are they'll have a positive outcome. And the inverse is true. If you feel like, hey, this doctor sucks, this procedure sucks, my life is over, probably you're not going to have a great outcome just with the power of expectation.
But isn't some on the doctor's side? So for instance, if the doctor mumbles, well, this may work, it may not work, I'm not really sure. We'll give it a try, as opposed to the doctor saying, this is going to make you feel better.
Right.
So this idea of, I used to say this when I teach the students in residence, that we need to inject confidence into what we do. The last thing I want to do is see a doctor or a nurse who's not confident in what they're doing, right? Particularly on procedures. It's like getting into an airplane. Do you want the pilot to say, well, I'm an okay pilot. Maybe we'll land. Maybe we won't. I'm kind of okay.
Yeah.
Or you want a pilot who's there. Pilots and doctors and others, we're edge players. You want a pilot who's an edge player. So listen, I'm the best pilot in the world. And if we get in trouble, I'm probably the only guy in the world who can land this. Do you remember when this plane engulfs the birds and it's stuck and it's literally going to crash into New York City, and he lands it on the Hudson
Solely.
River?
Yep.
You remember that?
Yeah.
So he's what I call an edge player. And I think particularly some of these doctors, cardiac surgeons, neurosurgeons, they have to be edge players. Interventional cardiologists, I train with those guys. They have to make decisions. They have to make these decisions. Oh, do I have a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial to see that, I've got to get this patient off the bypass pump and make some decisions? No, you have to make decisions. And it's based on clinical judgment. And what we saw with the pandemic is that suddenly clinical judgment was gone and everybody sat back in fear and waited for Anthony Fauci to tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep, almost by design. But yes, I to close on that, a lot of neurosurgeons get hate for their persona. They're think they're next to God and all of these things, and maybe they could tone it down just a little bit. But to your point, they do have to enter a room with confidence, knowing that they are the best damn surgeon in the room that can save the life when they are called to do so.
Yeah, that's it. And a surgeon, you're not going to see him once every 3 months or 6 months in the clinic for life. No, you're going to see him for an operation.
Right.
I always tell the surgeon, spare me all the drama. Just do a high-quality surgery. I'm the medicine doctor. I'll take it from here.
Yeah,
I just need you to do the surgery.
Yeah. So at what point, you're starting to see some issues that are coming up in your clinic, in your cardiac patients. At what point did you think, you know what? The institutional response is deviating from what I would expect traditional medical values to dictate?
I was at a major medical center here in Dallas, and I was on some of the COVID response committees, and I was in charge of the research aspect, but I was on all the calls. And initially, we were frightened. We saw what was going on in Wuhan and then Milan, Italy, and New York, and I remember we had some meetings, and some of our critical care docs said, listen, we're going to assign some of the younger people to, be in the hospital and deal with these really sick people. And some of the older doctors, we're going to hold you back because we saw this age gradient in terms of mortality. And I was so impressed with their courageousness. I didn't feel too courageous. I'm more of an outpatient doctor. Wasn't going to be on that front line. I was trying to develop research protocols. But most of the meetings dealt with personal protective equipment, who's going to get the masks, who's going to get hazmat suits, reverse ventilation. And I started listening to these calls. And after 2 or 3 of these, we're talking through January, February, and probably early March of 2020, I realized, wait a minute, nothing here is for the patient. Everything is to protect the doctors and nurses. Mm. What about the patients? Mm-hmm. What's in it for them? I've heard enough about how we're going to protect ourselves. How are we going to treat the patients? And I remember on one of these calls, I said, listen, if we don't start treating patients early in the course of this illness, they will end up in the hospital. And there was an all-hands-on-deck call of the National Institutes of Health, and I was on that call, and I learned a lot from that. There were thousands of people on that call. One of the things I learned, and I want to say this was late February, early March of 2020, that people were dying in the hospital despite mechanical ventilation, despite ECMO and hemodialysis and all the modalities. I said, wait a minute. Since when does a viral illness kill somebody despite maximum support? Mm-hmm. And what the doctors were reporting, so we're seeing blood clots like we've never seen before. The dialysis lines and other lines, the ECMO lines, are clotting off. There's something about this virus that causes blood clotting. And I thought to myself, oh my Lord, if we wait till people get in the hospital and start having blood clotting, we're cooked. And I remember on one of these calls, I said, well, okay, are we going to form a subcommittee, or how are we going to plan to treat patients early at home, treat them from our clinics or at least over the phone to help them avoid hospitalization and death? And do you know? No one said a word. The line went silent. I said, oh my Lord, these are some of my respected colleagues. I thought to nobody had a single idea. I said, oh my Lord, when this virus hits Dallas, they're going to let the virus slaughter their patients. They're not even going to try to save them.
That sounds like it would be an unusual response with a group of physicians who would try to just sort of sit back and let it happen. But it sounds like that's what happened.
That's exactly what happened.
You're the only one saying, wait, how can we treat them before they get here?
Right. Right. And, there was nothing from the big organizations, the AMA, the American College of Physicians, American College of Family Physicians, none of the subspecialty societies that said, wait a minute, we're going to at least give a try of some protocol at home to help prevent hospitalization and death. Now, if people get sick at home, but they survive, that's a win.
Right.
But when you get hospitalized, that's when things started to go wrong. And clearly, when people went on the mechanical ventilator, it was curtains. Some of the early reports were death rates even up to 90% of the mechanical ventilator. Now, it did come down, but a recent analysis, even years into the pandemic from Johns Hopkins, they're still reporting 30% mortality for COVID-19 pneumonia on the ventilator. This is years into this, 30% mortality. I mean, as a cardiologist, the most lethal heart attack we face is called an ST segment elevation myocardial infarction. That's a 2% mortality. Really? 30% mortality is going to be acceptable? And to this day, none of the hospitals have reviewed their report card on COVID. Which hospital had the lowest COVID mortality? Which one had the most prudent use of mechanical ventilation? What did they do differently?
Yeah.
All these hospitals, you go in any town in America, the hospitals want to brag that they're number one in heart disease or number one in cancer, orthopedics, right?
We've all seen the billboards.
Right?
Yeah.
How come there's no billboards that say we're number one in COVID? I mean, it was the leading cause of hospitalization through 2020 and 2021.
Yeah.
I'm on a standing Senate committee for Arizona, and we've had several sessions, and the senators asked me, Dr. McCullough, what can we do better with pandemic response? And I said, well, why don't you call in the chief medical officers and CEOs of your major health systems and review how they did with COVID? The only way to learn how to get better is to review what you did. And let's find out who had the lowest mortality, highest mortality, ventilator use. What are the best practices? And the senators tell me, Dr. McCullough, they will not show up for that meeting.
That's really scary when you think about, because there's always this talk of the next pandemic. What's coming next? It's probably going to be another SARS type virus is what we're hearing. And yet, what are we doing to prepare for it? Literally, there's no retrospection. There's no studies to suggest, hey, this hospital had the lowest mortality rate. Why? And let's mimic them. That you're telling us that's not happening.
No. 6 years into this, not a single state meeting. We've had Trump 1.0, Biden and Trump 2.0 administrations, not a single meeting in Washington to review how we did with the pandemic.
Something you talk about in your book is a term called treatment nihilism, where essentially there's this idea that they're just totally ignoring and putting down this concept of early outpatient treatment for these patients. And I think you described that very well. Even in some cases, institutions were limiting or forbidding the use of vitamin C. Like, what is going on?
Or vitamin D.
Right.
Or simple nasal sprays and gargles. So what happened with the pandemic from the very beginning was a mindset. And the mindset is it's unassailable. It's untreatable. It was presented to us this way. There wasn't a single person who got on national TV and said, you know what, doctors, we don't know how to treat this, but give it your best shot. Try to save as many lives as you can. Trump didn't say that. Fauci didn't say that. Ashish Jha. No one did.
Right.
Nobody in any of the administrations looked back on this and said, you know what, I want to find out who's successful and who isn't. So everyone who went out there and gave it the good old college try, we didn't know what was going to work and what wasn't. But we actually looked for nutraceuticals, drugs of different types that had a signal of benefit, a reason why they should work, and then acceptable safety. That was the main thing. If it was safe, in my view, we should put it together and give it a shot. So I published the most widely used protocol in the world that became copyrighted in my name for accountability called the McCullough Protocol, and it was published in the American Journal of Medicine in August of 2020, and that was early.
There it is.
So there it is, McCullough Protocol. There's the copyright. And so this was very flexible. This said, we're going to have to risk stratify here. We'll try nasal sprays and gargles. Anybody under age 50 who's healthy, we don't need a lot of heavy-duty stuff. They're going to be fine, just observation. We definitely don't need to lock down healthy people. Now, if you're sick, staying away from other people, that's fine. So I was never one. You never saw me on TV saying we should lock down. Never saw me on TV saying we should wear a mask, of course, because masks don't, viruses go right through them. I said, listen, we should give the best base of nasal pharyngeal hygiene with nasal sprays and gargles, get fresh air, nutraceuticals and vitamins, easy things to do. So there's tons of positive data with vitamin D, less so with vitamin C, zinc, quercetin, even an over-the-counter product called famotidine, an antihistamine antacid, worked fine. And then the antivirals, a lot of points of contention. First, we worked with hydroxychloroquine, modestly effective, ivermectin, far more effective. But even when Paxlovid and molnupiravir came in, and there was even a drug in Asia that was used very early on, and we included it in our protocol. Secondary antibiotics, we found people were getting bacterial pneumonias that could be fatal if not treated. I think the drug that probably had the biggest effect at all, though, was steroids, corticosteroids. And to this day, none of the societies or governments have any outpatient protocol that uses steroids as an outpatient. It's only kind of minimal dose steroids used in the hospital. And, in medicine, we use steroids all the time. Then there was colchicine, montelukast, everything we needed to have data for, and aspirin as an anticoagulant. Then we got into heavy-duty anticoagulants. But the concept of treating high-risk patients on day one, I treated patients in their 90s, people with heart failure, diabetes, and it was a rough illness at home. But the point is, the protocol, the approach of doing something as opposed to nothing, looking back, is credited with saving tens of millions of lives and sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalizations. McCullough Protocol did more for the pandemic than any other advancement or intervention. Far more than vaccines, far more than masks or lockdowns. And to this day, not a single government in the world will recognize an early outpatient treatment protocol.
Wow. And you weren't quiet about it either. I mean, you took this to the U.S. Senate, explaining your position. And of course, you were all over the news and podcasts explaining your position and getting your word out. But still, the force behind you was lacking. Why do you think that was?
Yeah, well, certainly the support was lacking. And do you know how that how I landed in the U.S. Senate is I had this protocol. I'd published it in the American Journal of Medicine. I was communicating. It was an author on the paper. Joe Ladapo, the former Surgeon General of Florida. Harvey Risch was the senior author. He's on the chief medical board of the Wellness Company. Because we were using hydroxychloroquine, I even had a prominent ophthalmologist in Dallas on the group just to let us know we're going to have any problems with eye safety. My former boss here in Dallas, an electrophysiologist, again, because we're using hydroxychloroquine and changes in the QT interval and EKG. So it really had it was Emory, UCLA, major institutions on McCullough Protocol. The interesting thing is, once I had done this, my daughter had come home to visit, and at the time she was in law school. And I said, I've published, I think, the only approach in the world to help people with this pandemic. And then she said, well, why don't you make a YouTube video out of it? I said, I don't even know what YouTube is, let alone make a YouTube video. I don't use any social media. It was just, just an academic doctor. I dealt with email. And so I just made a 4-slide PowerPoint showing the first page of the paper, the major figures, and I recorded myself. She showed me how to do it. She recorded myself in PowerPoint. It made the teeny weeniest little video. and I got uploaded onto YouTube. I think I had like, one subscriber or one follower, and I had one file. And it was within a day or so struck down for violation of community rules. And I didn't even know it was struck down, and it was a weekend, and I got a call on my cell phone, directly on my cell phone, and said, "This is Senator Ron Johnson from the U.S. Senate. I want to talk to you." I was like, oh, my Lord.
Wow.
He goes, "You can treat COVID?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Here's the protocol, and I've been doing it, and we're finding our way. We're trying to help people." And he invited me to be the lead witness in the U.S. Senate.
Ron Johnson.
Ron Johnson, he's a Republican from Wisconsin. November 19th, 2020. And I'll never forget, I went to Washington with my wife. It was a ghost town. The entire place was shut down.
Yeah.
There was like 3 people in our entire hotel, a huge hotel. You couldn't even find a place to go eat dinner. All the restaurants were shut down. And we go into the Senate building. The Russell building is connected to Dirksen. No one's there. No press, no staffers. We go into the Senate chamber, and I present the case. And Johnson taught me a lot. He said, "McCullough, listen." He said, "If you got something important to say, you better say it in 5 minutes or less." And I gave the presentation. We answered questions. And, one of the last questions I was asked, and we're wearing these smothering masks. We could take it off when we speak, but at the end, we were asked to stand, and there was one final question to our panel. And it was myself, George Fareed, who had treated thousands of patients in South Central California, former NIH researcher and wonderful man, and Harvey Risch, an epidemiologist from Yale. And the final question we had is, do any of you have any concerns regarding the COVID vaccines? Now, this is November 19th, 2020. The clinical trials did not read out yet. All we heard was a press release that they were highly effective.
Right.
So none of us voiced any concerns. That's a regret. I wish at that time I would have articulated. I had already published an opinion editorial in The Hill in August of 2020 titled "The Great Gamble of the COVID-19 Vaccine Development Program." I wish I would have been assertive. But I wasn't. I was trying to be respectful. We were finishing the hearing. And the minority witness, Ashish Jha, who was the dean at the Brown University School of Public Health, he became the White House coronavirus coordinator under Biden. He had a pre-written op-ed in the New York Times the next day calling me and my panel snake oil salesmen of the Senate. So he, the entire time, intended to defame me in the New York Times the next day. And when my little video was slammed on YouTube, when I was defamed by someone of reasonable academic standing, by November 20th of 2020, I knew something very, very bad was going on. As if 2020 wasn't bad enough.
Right.
My father had been through severe COVID in Dallas. He survived. He received the McCullough protocol, but we didn't see him for months because he was locked down in a nursing facility. We'd moved my parents from Alabama. My dad had a pelvic fracture. He was in the facility. My wife's parents were on a rope in Toronto. 2020 was so hard, and I was doing everything I could. But when I saw that, and that I was defamed in the New York Times, snake oil salesman, it was published in the American Journal of Medicine. It was peer reviewed.
Wow.
I answered the letters to the editor. You knew me. I was, a reasonable academic physician.
You weren't on the outskirts of the physician world.
No, not at all.
You're not practicing,
No, I was editor,
crazy.
I was editor of 2 major journals. I was a full professor of medicine. I was studying heart and kidney interactions. I was the inaugural editor of Cardiorenal Medicine journal, and I had my own textbook. I was a senior associate editor of the American Journal of Cardiology, one of the most respected journals in cardiology. I was at all the major heart meetings. I was on FDA advisory panels, on kind of sub-panels. I had chaired 24 data safety monitoring boards for the FDA, for for the NIH, for Big Pharma, interfaced with the FDA. I had actually already lectured on a product label expansion for the FDA and the Congressional Oversight Panel in 2007. I was on C-SPAN for hours back in 2007. Lectured at the New York Academy of Sciences and all across Europe. In fact, ironically, in 2019, I was the named endowed visiting professor at Harvard in 2 divisions. I lectured in cardiology and nephrology. So I was good enough to lecture at Harvard. They invited me and my wife, and we had all these celebratory dinners, and I delivered lectures, right on point. And now in 2020, I'm a snake oil salesman in the New York Times. Astounding. And that was just kind of the opening salvo. This has been, in many ways, a war for 6 years.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. I mean, that's why we're putting you in this position of admiration, because you saw something. I mean, you were every decision you made up to that point put you in the right place at the right time. And to see what happened to you really, I think, exposed the system that we're up against, and it doesn't play fair. Not by any stretch. And I'm curious to know, you mentioned you were FDA advisory panels. Tell us a little bit about the FDA, because I think that even during 2020, they gave a warning, I think, about hydroxychloroquine, but the warning was based on the use in hospitalized patients when the argument was to use it in early outpatient treatment. So the FDA is not a purely scientific organization. Is that a true statement?
I had tremendous respect for the FDA, for its FDA. To be an FDA chairman, commissioner was just an incredibly prestigious post. And there was a whole series of these. I greatly respected them. In 2020, it was Stephen Hahn. He's a hematologist, oncologist. But in 2020, we saw all kinds of very, very unusual things. So let's take hydroxychloroquine. So hydroxychloroquine is an FDA-approved generic drug. Its labeled indications are for rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus, and malaria prevention. But its off-label uses are numerous, other different types of inflammatory conditions, et cetera. Safety profile extremely well known. In fact, it's been used in pregnancy and found to be safe. Very few drugs have a randomized
That's
trial
exceptional.
on pregnant women.
Right.
It's cardiac safety exhaustively studied. We understand it. Probably the most serious side effect with hydroxychloroquine is a form of a hemolytic anemia that occurs in glucose 6 pyrite dehydrogenase deficiency, G6PD. That's the most serious thing that can happen. And so it was one of these drugs we understood well. There was some preliminary data with SARS-1. It looked like it was efficacious and it was available to us. And the FDA, in the most bizarre move ever, it places an emergency use authorization on hydroxychloroquine. So, wait a minute. It's already approved. It's already on the market. It doesn't need to be additionally authorized for anything. The emergency use authorization mechanism has been used for about a dozen or so products before the pandemic. It's only for something that's experimental, not fully tested, to be used in the setting of an urgent situation, and largely just used for military applications. So it was used for the anthrax vaccine as an example, but not for an existing product that we can use. Doctors, we use drugs off their advertising label all the time. The FDA agrees that it's appropriate. It came down to I was at several meetings at the FDA, and we had these discussions. In 2018, there was guidance written to say, yeah, listen, the advertising label that a drug company lobbies for has nothing to do with what the doctors choose to use the drug for. We use the drug when we find it to be appropriate. In fact, in cardiology, there are drugs that are not labeled for conditions that is actually in the guidelines to use it in that condition.
Same thing in pain management.
Okay, you have the same thing, right? So the label is irrelevant in terms of indications. However, the agreement is we should all care about safety.
Absolutely.
So the safety is the same. So it puts an emergency use authorization on hydroxychloroquine. That's distinctly unusual. So I guess, what does that mean? We're using it anyway. And it was used in the hospital, a very large study by Henry Ford Hospital, over 1,000 patients. Those placed on hydroxychloroquine survived better. It was published in a peer-reviewed journal. And then it was just a series of fraudulent papers published. There was one from the Mayo Clinic that I brought up in the Senate hearing where they showed hydroxychloroquine causing scars in the heart. It doesn't cause scars in the heart. It's just completely fraudulent paper. Right. Paper saying, well, it increases mortality. It turns out the entire database used was fake. And that was retracted from Lancet. And so by the summer of 2020, the FDA comes out and says, we're pulling the emergency use authorization that it didn't need, and they put out a statement, do not use hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID. Well, wait a minute. We're using it as an outpatient. It seems to be working fine. The supportive data, and the one bigger inpatient study, it clearly worked. There was a doctor in France, Didier Raoult, who was the first to publish the data that Trump and Fauci looked at and had the press release, and he went on to demonstrate lots of efficacy in large studies in France. So that was going on scientifically, but what I realized, what was going on politically was mind-blowing. So a billionaire in Australia, Clive Palmer, is tracking all of this. He buys enough hydroxychloroquine to treat everyone in Australia. The population in Australia is about as big as Texas. And he's got this stockpile. He procures it. The Australian authorities seize the hydroxychloroquine and they destroy it. They destroy it.
That is unusual.
So why would you destroy a perfectly good drug stockpile? We can use it for other things. Mm-hmm. So something was going on in 2020. This is all in the first half of 2020. That was giving us strong signals that, wait a minute, there's some force out there. They don't want anyone to be treated for this illness in any setting.
And there's so many layers to that as well. I mean, from the federal government to the state and the physicians all the way down to the patients. I mean, I would imagine being a patient in that time would be so confusing and terrifying. Who do you believe? What's propaganda? What's true? And the overwhelming, voices like, well, hey, we'll give you a free cheeseburger if you take the shot.
Can you imagine that? Well, even before they came out, I'll never forget in 2020, while we got going with McCullough protocol, we had successes with hydroxychloroquine. I think the steroids worked the most. And I didn't use steroids, I think, until about May or so. My dad had it in April, and he didn't get any steroids, and he really languished. It was a very, very long, severe illness for him. But once we started using steroids as an outpatient, I think that made a huge difference. And I didn't mess around with dexamethasone or oral Decadron. We don't really use that in the outpatient realm. We just use prednisone.
Prednisone, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So once we started using prednisone, that was a game changer. But when we got to bamlanivimab, which was November of 2020, this was an FDA emergency use authorized high-tech monoclonal antibody that binds the spike protein of the virus. It's like, wow, there should be no issues here, right? This has made it through. The government did the studies. It reduced, the risks of hospitalization and death. Every study showed it. There was a paper in medical economics saying the government bought enough monoclonal antibodies to treat every patient in America. I said, we got it.
Wow.
Every nursing home should be stocked with monoclonal antibodies. Every hospital ER. Everybody going to the ER should get a monoclonal antibody. Everyone going to urgent care. What happened? None of that. There was no supply of monoclonal antibodies. I don't know where they were, but no one was getting them. And sadly, my patients, we go on a scramble here in Dallas, my patients who got the monoclonal antibodies, even the sickest patients, they survived.
So your perspective might be that they found a real good, safe, and effective treatment that was then squashed once they realized it was real good, safe, and effective.
Yeah, you couldn't find it. There was great confusion. I'll never forget Joe Ladapo, by that time became the Surgeon General in Florida. Him and Ron DeSantis just were trying to set up infusion centers. They couldn't get a supply of these. And it turned out there were 6 monoclonal antibodies, one after another, were taken off the market. After sometimes just a few weeks.
Wow.
They said, the virus is mutating. This is probably not going to work. Wait a minute, if the virus is mutating, why would a vaccine work but not a monoclonal antibody?
Correct. Yep.
So there was this double standard going on.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that going on with monoclonal antibodies, I said to myself, wait a minute. It doesn't matter if it's cheap, low-tech, simple, available, or if it's high-tech, hard to get. All forms of treatment are going to be squashed. All forms.
And it wasn't even just, at the top levels. I remember trying to prescribe ivermectin for a patient with COVID. Mm-hmm. And the pharmacist was like, oh, no, we don't fill that for that indication. I was like, well, there's actually good evidence to support its safety and efficacy. And they're like, no, I mean, you're just trying to give them bleach. They might as well just drink bleach. We're not going to do that. I'm sorry. I didn't know you were the doctor. That was my first oh, I guess I don't have full prescriptive authority over my patient. Yeah.
Do you know, early in 2020, I was prescribing hydroxychloroquine for a patient. And I got the same type of phone call from a pharmacy, typically like a CVS or Walgreens.
Yes.
And, a big chain pharmacy. And they said, what are you prescribing this for? I said, the patient's sick with COVID. They said, do you know that the guidelines say not to use hydroxychloroquine? There were no outpatient guidelines at the time. And he kept going on and on and on. And I thought to myself, does this guy read the guidelines for every condition that a medicine is prescribed for? I said, listen, thanks for your review. Fill the prescription. It's my order.
Right.
And, he had to knuckle under and fill the prescription. But within a few months, they actually refused to prescribe the drug. So that's another thing that we saw. Yeah. Since when do pharmacists take it upon themselves to refuse to fill a lawful prescription? And because pharmacists refused to fill those prescriptions, some patients were hospitalized and some were died. And it was on them.
Right.
It was on them that the patients. So something came into the minds of pharmacists, and it was clearly hydroxychloroquine. It was ivermectin.
Definitely.
They refused to fill prednisone in some cases.
Oh, wow.
They refused to fill colchicine. They refused to fill anything if it was for acute SARS-CoV-2 infection.
I've heard of pain physicians not getting their prescriptions filled at the pharmacy for opioids because they're controlled substances. Mm-hmm. The pharmacy does carry some liability in that regard. And if they don't have a certain confidence in that physician, they don't want to be wrapped up in that. So they just decide. But what the drugs you're referring to have been long around, commonly used for off-label uses, which is what we're doing here. And so there's really no reason not to fill this medication except perhaps some higher up order that may have been given. I don't know. That's me.
If there was a memo,
hypothesizing.
If there was a memo saying don't fill prednisone,
because it seems so coordinated. That's what blows me away.
What's mind-boggling to me is not only is it coordinated, was it uniform, but I think it occurred without even any memos or emails. It was also worldwide. It was worldwide.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you coordinate the minds of people worldwide to all do the same thing? It's stunning. So in 2020,
wow,
not only was this huge Australian stockpile destroyed, I was getting reports from doctors in Africa. I did some things on Clubhouse, which healthcare is pretty, limited. I said, Dr. McCullough, there's some type of bad guys coming in and they're burning the hydroxychloroquine in the pharmacies. They're burning it. I said, really? I said, who are these guys? They go, we don't know, but they're white, Caucasian. They look like paramilitary guys. And the second largest factory that makes hydroxychloroquine in Asia burned down mysteriously?
Didn't hear that.
This is just stunning. So that happened in 2020, but we quickly figured out that ivermectin an antiparasitic drug was far more effective.
Right.
And it worked rapidly. Trying to figure out the dose took some time. But by the second version of McCullough protocol, December 2020, we had ivermectin in there. That was the big winner. And one of the early treatment experts, in fact, I set him up to follow me in the U.S. Senate, Pierre Corey, on the next deliberations. He wrote a book that I think is one of the most aptly named book. It's called The War on Ivermectin. And in 2021, there was an all-out war on ivermectin. And that's when the FDA started a false advertising campaign against ivermectin. And they put on social media that it's just horse paste.
Right, that was the FDA.
That it doesn't work. There was a CNN release where Joe Rogan said he took ivermectin, and they put a green filter over it to make Joe look green. There were fake news reports that people were developing liver toxicity for ivermectin, which wasn't occurring. And this went on and on and on. And it was a complete war. And so what happened in the aftermath, Mary Taylor Bowden, a doctor in Houston, Robert Apter, a doctor in Arizona, ER doctor, and Paul Merrick, one of the most renowned critical care doctors in the world, they sued the FDA. They sued the FDA for making false statements regarding ivermectin and dissuading people from using this very effective drug. And you know that the lawyers for the FDA, they backed down and they said, you know what, you're right, we'll remove all of our false information. So these actions by the FDA, now all of this happened under Stephen Hahn, I believe. But the next FDA commissioner, this was a shocker, was a personal friend of mine, Robert Califf, very esteemed cardiologist from Duke. He headed up the Duke Clinical Research Institute. He had a prior tour as FDA commissioner. And the reason why, to me, it was so shocking is because he was a drug safety hawk. And I'll never forget, I chaired a meeting every year, and Duke was part of the meeting, so I was with Califf every year. And we'd have these debates, and Califf goes, we can't go far enough on drug safety. We should have tighter rules on data safety monitoring. And it's like, wow, he's really looking after drug safety. Wow. And then the COVID vaccines roll out. And people start dying almost immediately after the shots. It was so bad early on that there were emergency efforts to get defibrillator carts and resuscitation equipment to the vaccine
on the
centers.
fields. People were dropping. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. And so, and Califf doesn't say a word. There's no immediate safety review, nothing. And in fact, by March of 2021, 3 months into this, the CDC on their website for the vaccine adverse event reporting system, they're already at 1,600 deaths. And on the FDA website, they said, well, we saw these deaths. We've reviewed them all. None of them are due to the vaccine.
Oh, not one.
Not one. And I said, I've chaired data safety monitoring boards. I mean, this is a field I know.
Yeah.
You can't take 1,600 cases, get all the hospital records, get the labs, get the paramedic run sheets, get independent doctors together, review them, have an agreement principle, do all this in 3 months, and conclude that none were due. It was another false statement by the FDA, and this time the CDC, under Califf's watch. So when I get called to the Texas Senate in March of 2021, and we're at 1,600 deaths. Now, the number of vaccine deaths that ever occur in a year, and half the country takes vaccines with flu shots.
Yeah, let's put this in perspective.
Yeah, is 150 a year. It can be, a rare fatal allergic reaction, whatever.
Sure.
150, not 1,600. So by March of 2020, we had blown this out of the water. And in the Texas Senate, I expressed reservations. I said, I'm concerned. I said, I'm very concerned. These deaths that are occurring immediately, and subsequently we've had Senate hearings on this. The May 2025 hearing looked back. Do you know the Biden administration and Califf at the FDA and Walensky at the CDC, they were getting reports of people dying with the vaccine, official reports, and they decided to bury it. And one of the prominent reports came in from Israel. Israel had 62 cases of heart damage called myocarditis occurring from the vaccine in February of 2021. Two of the Israeli soldiers died. And they decided to squash it. They decided, instead of releasing this out so we could be prepared for what's going to go on, they intentionally let more Americans get slaughtered by the vaccine. And still no justice. Still no justice. This has been brought up multiple times to the Department of Justice. And as of today, it's relevant because the person that this was brought to in the recent administration is Pam Bondi. And she's out.
Wow. I mean, there's been so many revelations in the last year or two with the Epstein files and everything. Knowing what you know now and having this retrospective view on what everything went down, what was going on? I mean, do you have a sense now where we're going and why this happened?
Yeah, what happened? Great question. In my first book, Courage to Face COVID-19, Preventing Hospitalizations and Deaths While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex. And in my second book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality, which is a New York Times bestseller, came out in 2025. We've concluded. Now, it's myself and best-selling author and historian John Leake, who's from Dallas. John is probably one of the world's greatest historical scholars. We've concluded that there was an aspiration, a long-held aspiration, to mass vaccinate the world using genetic messenger RNA vaccines. This is stunning. Once we got to the U.S. BioShield Act in 2004 and then the PrEP Act in 2005, it said we are going to prepare for pandemics. The government's going to take over when this occurs. Everyone's going to be liability-free. When the military, DARPA, the research was announced in 2012 that it'll end pandemics in 60 days using messenger RNA vaccines. 2012? They put it on their website. That's the goal. So when Moderna starts making, pandemic vaccines around that time frame, starting getting government money, and they co-patent the COVID vaccine with the U.S. government, it becomes clear the U.S. government is part of a big-time international collaboration to mass vaccinate the world. And in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which, the U.S. research was outsourced there, Dr. Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, one of the most prominent coronavirus researchers, devises a coronavirus that can invade and kill humans by design, and publishes it in Nature Medicine and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2015 and 2016. In the title of the papers, it says it's poised for human emergence. It can't be any more clear than that. This is going to happen. The coronavirus was intentionally weaponized for the purposes of mass vaccinating the world, that those two go together. And in 2024, I believe, I testified in the U.S. House of Representatives, a closed-door session. And I was the day right after Anthony Fauci, same panel. So, I had a chance to sidebar conversations, what have you. And I said, well, what was Fauci's, what did he say? Essentially, what the distillation was, is Fauci said, yes, the COVID-19 pandemic was, the main purpose of it was to try to mass vaccinate the world. This was an exercise in trying to see if we can mass vaccinate the world. The whole part of it, locking people down, creating fear, suppressing all forms of treatment, doing everything we can, coercion, everything we can to give somebody a vaccine. And it didn't even matter what type of vaccine. So we had messenger RNA vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, and Janssen in the United States. They had AstraZeneca, which is identical to Janssen in UK. But we had Novavax, a antigen-based vaccine. And in Asia, they had the Sinovac Coronavac vaccine, which is a kill vaccine. It didn't matter what vaccine. It just mattered if you took one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Where's your passport? Yeah.
And so, excuse me. And so Yeah, if you have some water, that'd be great.
Let's get him some water. Thank you.
So you knew this was the case because if you looked at employment guidelines, immigration guidelines, and the U.S. immigration guidelines were like this forever. You couldn't immigrate till you took to the United States until you took a COVID vaccine. But it didn't matter when you took it. Remember, the vaccines only lasted for a couple months in duration. Anthony Fauci said that. Listen, they don't last very long. You have to take boosters. Yeah, thanks. And so if it was about immunity, then the policy would have been written, well, listen, you got to have a shot every 6 months. If it was about immunity, it was actually just about compliance. Would you do this? Would you take the shot?
Yeah.
Also, employers, virtually no employers had policies that checked your immunity. You take it every 6 months. It was just here, just take it.
I remember we were like, hey, I already had the virus. Check my immunity. That way I don't have to get the shot. It's not like the shot's been around forever. There should be an understanding that there's legitimate fear for a new medical technology. But no, that wasn't an option. I remember that. They said, no, you just got to get the shot anyway.
Well, I had it in 2020.
Yeah.
With some pulmonary involvement. My wife had it.
The infection, not the shot.
Yeah, the infection, 2020.
Yeah.
And so when the vaccine came around, I said, no, I literally just had it a couple of months earlier.
Same.
I said, I'm good. And I remember the coordinator for the vaccine. She goes, well, no, you should take one anyway. I said, no, I just had the infection. I'm good. I felt privileged to have the infection. So I didn't. And I knew I had the infection, so I knew I was low risk for anything else. So, I didn't feel particularly compelled to wear a mask. And I made some house calls. I never wore a mask. I took care of sick COVID patients. Yeah. So it always seemed to me the most humorous thing is that if you could take care of a sick COVID patient in their house, whether you're a doctor or a nurse or just a family member helping out another family member, why would people in the hospital have to wear hazmat suits? Right?
Yeah.
So you're giving, hydroxychloroquine and an antibiotic and prednisone to somebody sick with COVID in their house. They're coughing. And I have my shorts and a T-shirt on, no mask. And yet that same patient, when they went in the hospital, doctors and nurses are wearing hazmat suits. You just knew. And do you know how expensive they are? You just knew that something was off. Or let's say a daughter was looking after her mother, who's a senior citizen, taking care of them at home for 3 weeks with COVID, coughing, this and that, and they get sicker, and then finally grandma goes into the hospital. And then they tell you, no, you can't come in and visit your grandmother. Say, wait a minute, I just took care of her for 3 weeks. She was sick as anything. Why can't I go to the bedside now?
Yeah.
So that was something else. All these things
that
just didn't add up, that were just, there's a zillion examples of things that don't make sense.
I can't help but notice there's probably a shared pattern between the COVID response and the opioid crisis response, at least from this side of the fence. Some would say, well, first you start with a crisis. Some would say manufactured. I'm thinking of the Sackler family, let's say. There's a centralized institutional overcorrection that leads to reduced physician autonomy, protocol-driven, one-size-fits-all approaches, guidelines, loss of clinical nuance, and then patients being harmed. We can speculate on, this worldwide coordination of why they would want to get everybody vaccinated. I'm sure there's no good reason for that, just based on all of the things that we've been talking about today. It seems like if they really did care about science, physician autonomy, patient health, and good outcomes, so many of these things would not have gone down the way that they did.
Good observation. In Peter Bregan's book, which was an early book, it's called COVID-19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey. I cite it frequently. We cite it heavily in our book. I wrote the introduction for the Bregan book. He points out that there were 36 pandemic preparedness planning events. 36. Starting back from 2002. 36 events. 24 of them provide written materials. You can just read it, that there was a government meeting or some act of legislation. 6 of them were filmed, where you have video evidence of this. So one of the more notable ones is in 2017, Johns Hopkins and the Bloomberg School of Public Health, funded by Bill Gates, in 2017 hold a seminar. It's called the SPARS pandemic. A coronavirus pandemic will happen in 2017. And they predicted it was going to happen in 2025, that people are going to get sick, there was going to be confusion regarding drug treatment, and then all resources were going to be used to literally railroad people into mass vaccination, including use of the White House and the president, and and so they publish a monograph on the Johns Hopkins website for everyone to download and read. In 2017, I didn't know about it, that they were predicting a coronavirus pandemic. And then as soon as the pandemic starts, they actually published 2 peer-reviewed papers from their seminar and said, hey, we called it. But the most notable one is Event 201 in November of 2019. So this is now 2 months before the cases really start to hit. And there, they again hold it at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. This time they film it, and you have all kinds of relevant players there. There's some prominent legislators, people involved in pandemic response. George Gao, the CDC director for China, flies over from China to be there. Avril Haines, who's a former associate at the World Economic Forum, who becomes our director of national intelligence under Biden. She's at Event 201. And what do they say? There's going to be a coronavirus pandemic. It's going to come from China. It's going to hit the United States. We're going to lock everybody down. We're going to conceal the laboratory origins. They at that point in time, they said it's coming out of a lab. This is filmed. And then we're going to railroad people into mass vaccination. I wasn't paying attention to this. I didn't watch the video.
Right.
So this is all, there's 36 of these, 24 written, 6 filmed, that said there's going to be a pandemic, and essentially it's going to be man-made. It's going to come out of a lab. And this is going to be a giant test for global vaccination. And sure enough, in the 2026 Davos meeting at the World Economic Forum, there was some review of the pandemic response. And one of the statements made was the COVID-19 pandemic was a test of global compliance. Would people comply with mass vaccination, masking, lockdowns, all of the other restrictions?
A lesson for physicians, and a question for you. How can a physician practice in this day and age in a system that continues to prioritize compliance over clinical judgment?
Oh, boy. I would say use it as a marketing tool. Let's just take the COVID vaccine. That's a giant discriminator.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of doctors took the COVID vaccine, and you ask them, you say, "Did you support it?" Yeah, I did. And it was a giant clinical mistake, whether they will admit it or not. Now it turns out that 19% of Americans didn't take a single shot. 19% is a big fraction.
Yep. 19%
for just a handful of doctors. Talk about a marketing campaign. All you have to do is say, listen, I'm unvaccinated. I'm an independent thinker. I'm open for business. You'll be flooded with patients.
Yeah.
You'll be flooded with patients. And I think for the doctors who took the vaccine and can fairly say it was a mistake and be honest with the patients, they can have that marketing advantage themselves. But the marketing advantage is so strong that many doctors who are unvaccinated, who are very, very good clinicians, they just quit participating with insurance. You can actually just go on the cash market and practice at a premium price point.
Right.
And there's a willingness to pay for that. So, so that way, independence is secured. Their finances are secured. Now, doctors have done that. You know what the threat has really been? The medical boards.
Okay.
The medical boards have been weaponized against these doctors, and one of the more prominent ones is Dr. Mary Kelly Bowden in Houston, and she's taken on the medical boards, and there's been suits and countersuits, and but we've seen this all across the nation doctors who are independent practitioners will get these sometimes anonymous medical board complaints, and then they're placed under investigation.
Interesting. Wow. So step out of line, pay the price is what I'm hearing.
For independence, right. Particularly on vaccines. I mean, that's the big ticket.
Yeah.
In fact, some states try to enact legislation to say, listen, if you're going to have any type of clinic, that you all have to be vaccinated. You have to force your patients to be vaccinated. I think New York and Maryland got that far ahead. And vaccines appear to be the big point of contention.
I've definitely seen the articles and hearing stories of pediatric offices. Because of all of this stuff, family members are exercising their education and autonomy and saying, hey, we don't want to vaccinate, or not all of the shots, or not all at once, or whatever. And historically, clinics would say, well, we're not going to treat you. I mean, I can think of a few hospitals around these parts. And it's like, well, no, you have to be vaccinated if you're going to be in our clinic. Well, what I'm hearing is there's so much resistance that they're changing their protocol to stay in business.
Right. The parking lot's pretty empty there. And so, if you're a pediatrician and you want to have more business, say, listen, we're open to a fair discussion on vaccines. So the observation there is the COVID-19 vaccine debacle, where the COVID-19 vaccines did not stop COVID. They did not stop transmission, and they did not reduce mortality. They were a complete bust. There's no valid studies demonstrated that they improve these clinical outcomes. All the ones that claim that the vaccines work have tremendous flaws that were not randomized, tremendous bias, lack of follow-up, lack of adjudication. Simply the vaccines didn't work in terms of efficacy. And they had a terrible safety profile, heart damage, strokes, and blood clots, and neuropathy, and autoimmune problems, potentially even cancer. So because the COVID-19 vaccine debacle, it's a safety debacle that no one will talk about, people are quietly pulling back from all vaccines and saying, listen, I can't trust these COVID shots. Why should I trust the other ones?
Exactly. Which is unfortunate, because a lot of vaccines do save lives.
Right. Well, there are vaccines that play a role. And the other thing that's converging, I didn't realize this was going on, is that we are reaching an asymptotic point on autism and autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
This is a big deal.
Yeah.
My kids are all grown up, and I don't interface with this at all. But as the data emerged, we when I was a kid, autism was 1 in 10,000. Now it's estimated to be 3.2% of all children. Some states it's over 5%, like California. And of kids with autism, 27% have profound autism, means they can't speak to their parents, can't look them in the eye, can't toilet independently. They're going to need lifelong institutional care.
Right.
So over 1% of California kids now are like that, and growing. So this autism epidemic opened my eyes to the idea that, wait a minute, could this be linked to the other thing that's exploded over the last several decades, and that is excessive vaccination for childhood vaccines. And so, believe it or not, looking at this, the McCullough Foundation, we did a deep dive on this. It's a big part of our second book.
Yeah.
We looked back on this. Do you know that Leo Kanner, the child psychiatrist who originally coined the term autism and described it, in 11 kids with autism, one of them, in his very first paper, one of them developed it right after the smallpox vaccine. And about 20 childhood vaccines list encephalitis or brain inflammation as a side effect. 20 of them. So, any illness that can cause encephalitis, the vaccine can cause encephalitis.
Yeah.
So measles can cause encephalitis. So can mumps.
Right.
Well, so can their vaccines. And
right.
so,
exactly.
It goes on and on. And so
it's not black and white. I think that's a lot of the argument that well-meaning patients may have. It's like, well, it's either safe or it's not safe. It's either FDA approved, which means it's safe and effective, or it's not FDA approved, which means it's not safe or effective. There's so much nuance that gets lost, and nothing's 100% on anything. And so the decisions that we're charged with making as physicians, it's always a risk management decision.
Yeah, it's the risks and benefits. Nothing would be risk-free. So, there was a paper published by Stanford, and it was a baby, and the baby was coming in for a well baby visit, I think around a year and a half, and the baby gets the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella. And little did the doctors know that the baby had incipient acute myelogenous leukemia, or AML, just starting. No one knew. And that measles vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine. The measles virus is in the baby, and the baby's, white blood cells, the immune system is going down. The baby, it begins to get treatment with chemo and things. The virus mutates, invades the baby's brain, and kills the baby. They do an autopsy, and the brain is basically destroyed by the measles vaccine virus. And the doctors at Stanford published this. So this case clearly shows the measles vaccine is not 100% safe. That something can go. And listen, I took the measles vaccine. My kids took the vaccine. I'm not against vaccines. Yeah. So when we look at this, a big watershed moment was 1986, Andrew Wakefield, who's a gastroenterologist and surgeon in the UK, publishes a seminal observation that kids who take the MMR vaccine, particularly young kids, some of them can actually convert to autism. They were normal. They take the vaccine, they get sick, and then a few days or a few weeks later, they actually develop features of autism.
Right.
It's a pretty important observation. He publishes it in Lancet, which is like one of the best medical journals ever, to, in a sense, wake us up to the fact that this can happen. Once you get the vaccines given by themselves are very safe, but once you start to put them in combinations, that's where the problems have occurred. Anyhow, this gets published in Lancet and gets people start to look at this. And in fact, many families begin to file lawsuits. And around that time, 1986, the HHS and the Congress write the Vaccine Injury Compensation Act and say, listen, there's just too much potential here for lawsuits. We have to provide immunity to the vaccine companies. Well, Wakefield's paper stands as a fully valid paper for over a decade. And then, I think around 2011 or so, it's retracted from Lancet after all this pressure probably from pharmaceutical companies and various agencies. And then Wakefield is smeared, and he's just a regular researching doctor. He loses his career over this. But in our book, we take it right up to about 2011. There's so much tension in America. There's so many kids with autism. The parents are starting to get a hint that, wait a minute, the vaccines could be related to autism. There was a class case in the U.S. Court of Claims. Thousands of parents take a case and say, wait a minute, we have this Vaccine Injury Compensation Act. We want compensation. Our kids were injured by the vaccine. So the court chooses a bellwether case, a seminal case. And it's the case of Hannah Poling. Little Hannah got behind on her vaccines, and so she gets a big bundle of vaccines around a year and a half, gets really, really sick, has a fever, whatever. She's normal prior to this, and she develops all the classic features of autism. But what's the difference is her father is Jonathan Poling. He's a neurologist from Johns Hopkins, and he watches this happen in his daughter, and he publishes a peer-reviewed case report of the vaccines causing autism in her case. So this is clear as bell. This is around 2010, 2011, U.S. Court of Claims. What does the U.S. Court of Claims do? They look at his peer-reviewed paper. His daughter has autism. She's destroyed by this. And he does careful muscle biopsies. He actually determines that she had some predisposing factors like a mitochondrial abnormality. They said, yes, the vaccines caused your child's autism. Let's pull you aside. And they brokered a separate private settlement with him. He gets settled. He never says a word about this ever again. They take all the other claims and they essentially say,
Wow.
sorry.
Yep.
So when that happened in 2010, 2011, that's only 15 years ago,
Yeah.
we started to get a sense, and our research was very careful, that this vaccine industry has gone bad. The government and vaccines has gone bad. People are being harmed by vaccines. Right. And so in 2025, or late 2024, the McCullough Foundation gets a grant to do an exhaustive review of what is causing autism. And we do it. We look at every source of evidence in the world. We assign scholars to it. I mean, this is as good as you're going to get. And we conclude, and we publish a report, press release and report published October 27th of 2025. We conclude that there are predisposing factors, for sure, that are playing a role. So older parents, man and a woman over 35, man over 40. Premature delivery before 37 weeks. These are secular trends that are occurring. Common genetic variants, but super common things that are in 25 to 50% of us, but they still are, they come out. Prenatal exposures to heavy psychiatric drugs like SNRIs, drugs like Celexa or Cymbalta, these types of drugs. Antipsychotics like Stelazine or Seroquel, and then anti-seizure drugs. Mm-hmm. Okay. If a woman's exposed to these or any of these other factors occur, the baby could be at risk for autism. But the trigger, what converts the kid to autism, is a big bundle of vaccines. And the data were overwhelming. So we published a comprehensive report on the European Commission open air server. It's a very solid way to publish, to get the initial observation out. We write a cover letter, we do a press release, and we write a cover letter with the full document. We send it to Robert F. Kennedy at HHS, the White House, all the relevant people in Washington. No response. 19 days later, in the middle of the night, the CDC on their website changes the language to say, the connection between vaccines and autism hasn't been rolled out. Before they were saying, no, there's no connection whatsoever.
Right.
So 19 days later, they changed their view.
And that's a big statement, by the way.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. Because everyone's wondering, where's all this autism coming from?
Right.
Genetics don't change that quickly. And, people are looking around, well, is it pollution? Is it microplastics? Is there something else? No. I mean, the vaccines cause brain inflammation. The brain inflammation in some kids can change the neuronal pathways and create the phenotypic expression of autism. So now our paper has been fully accepted in a peer-reviewed journal. It's going to come out shortly, and it's going to be another big hullabaloo on this. So this ultimately gets to Trump. And Trump is frustrated because there's this whole HHS machinery, the advisory practice on immunization committee, and all this stuff, and nothing's happening outside of the CDC statement. So he pulls Jim O'Neill aside. Jim O'Neill is a former pharmaceutical guy, Palantir IT guy, who's the acting director of the CDC. And Trump tells him, trim the schedule, just trim these vaccines out. Mm-hmm. And he said, make it look like Denmark, because Denmark's much fewer vaccines. So they go from 17 vaccine preventable diseases to 11. They trim off 55 doses. And Jim O'Neill, in a stroke of a pen, changes the vaccine schedule. And the reason why this is important, even though it's a CDC recommended schedule of vaccines, is memorialized into law in most states for kids who go to school. So this is not a trivial recommendation. So the vaccine freedom community cheers. And Kennedy kind of tried to catch up with it as if he had something to do with it. I'm not sure he did. I think Trump just, did a boss move. And that happened in December of 2025. And here we are, March of 2025, the Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Physicians, about 11 organizations And interestingly, the autism organizations, why would they be involved? They all form a plaintiff class. They find a liberal judge, and they overturn Trump, RFK, the ACIP schedule, and they bring all the vaccine schedules back to where they were before all this reform. So I'm here to tell you, vaccines are very controversial in medicine. Very controversial, and everybody should look at this very carefully.
Yeah.
You made the observation that you're seeing this, and I'm seeing it too. A paper was published in JAMA by Vesuvian and colleagues, very important paper. And it surveyed young parents having children. And the answer was 60% of parents are not going to take this full vaccine schedule. They said, no, there's too many meetings in Washington. There's too many concerns.
Yeah.
There's too many books. And by the way, our book, Vaccines, Mythology, and Ideology and Reality, even though it's a New York Times bestseller, it builds upon many other books. And it turns out there are probably about 36 books published raising concerns that the vaccines have become too much, they're excessive, and they're leading to childhood diseases, allergic diseases like asthma and allergic dermatitis and allergic rhinitis, food allergies, which are skyrocketing, neuropsychiatric diseases, not just autism, but autism's by attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is 15% of kids, autism spectrum, 3.2% of kids, rising rates of tics, involuntary facial movements, and epilepsy or seizures requiring drugs. All of these are on the rise in children. So if you throw in obesity and other factors, we actually have more than half of children with a chronic disease now. And when you and I were kids, there was almost no one with a chronic disease.
Right. And it seems like everything these days gets blamed except for the vaccines for those causes, right? It's the food, it's the technology, it's the Wi-Fi.
Oh, there's an article in Time magazine last year. This kind of blew me away. And on the cover was all these young people looking despondent. And the title of the issue was, "Why do all these young people have cancer?" And and it's true. It's incontrovertible. Cancer is occurring at younger ages now. Not all cancers, but clearly in men, the solid organ cancers are on the rise. For sure, at earlier ages, colon, prostate come to mind. For women, breast cancer for sure. So all the cancers are on the rise. And these reporters for Time magazine, they go out to these cancer centers. Well, what could be causing it? And the doctors are saying, well, I don't know. Maybe it's pollution or microplastics or something in the water. They look all around themselves. And none of them consider that we just went through a pandemic.
Right.
The biggest health event of all time. Not a single person they talked to, not a single author said, well, wait a minute, we just had 6 years of a pandemic. And, it was a very important paper published by Cooperwasser and Elderi in the cancer journal Oncotarget, just came out in the last few months, that concluded both SARS-CoV-2 infection, the COVID virus, and the vaccines are linked to cancer, both of them. I mean, 300 studies, has summarized 300 studies.
So where's the outrage?
Well, where's the recognition by Time magazine? Where's the recognition by all the cancer centers? Still, many cancer centers are still recommending take more vaccines.
Right.
So we have a situation. We've got a 5-alarm fire on our going right now in cancer. And the mechanism by which the virus and the vaccine almost certainly raise the risk of cancer is they depress our cancer surveillance systems, P53 and BRCA. So if you already have a weakness in one of those systems and you're prone to cancer to begin with, watch out. Now cancer can take off like wildfire. And as in practice as an internist and cardiologist, I am so concerned about cancer in my patients. I'm carefully examining them. I'm doing much more intensive screening. I'm dropping off these age limits. When they say, well, you can't start cancer screening until this age, I said, forget it. If there's a concern, I'm going to get the screening test. And I'm turning up cancer. And I'm greatly worried about myself, my family members, whether you've had the virus itself or the vaccine. Watch out.
Yeah.
If you find any lump anywhere, get after it. Do not delay on your colonoscopies, your prostate exam, testicular exam, breast exam. I mean, I had a woman this week in my clinic. She's in her 90s. She's in her 90s. And you know what? She went through breast cancer with one breast in 1994, the other breast 2005. And she's just trying to enjoy whatever time she has left. She's actually in pretty good shape for 93. Now she's got breast cancer in both breasts after taking the shots. Like big. I mean, I could feel it.
Yeah.
Hard masses growing. And she's like, Dr. McCullough, how did this happen? I said, you know, I don't know for sure, but I think it could be linked. You've had a recurrence now.
Yeah.
After a cure,
Right.
you've had a recurrence due to the COVID-19 vaccination.
Right. Ah, it's terrible. Definitely, I would say my perception and experience is that patients have really lost a lot of trust in the medical community, physicians certainly included. And in pain management, I mean, going from the 90s to the 2000s, and then the CDC guidelines in 2016 pulled everything back. So patients were getting cut off of their opioid prescriptions pretty much overnight, which certainly contributed to the fentanyl use and overdose that we see now. So pain doctors, I came into this field pretty much with patients unhappy with the system. And it seems as though since COVID, everything has really gotten worse. How do you see yourself, or what advice would you give me or doctors coming up in their training, how we can regain or maintain a certain trust and rapport with our patients in this environment?
I think every doctor needs to take a COVID vaccine and a COVID illness history in patients. Patients are going to be furious if you don't do it. So I had patients today, you know, once I go through the basics of setting up their pharmacy, doing their family history, I get their history. I said, let's start off. How many COVID vaccines did you take? What brand and what year? And how many times did you get COVID illness? And was it severe, and were you hospitalized? Because if you ignore it, the patients know the connections. They know the connections. Then I go through the rest of it, and sometimes their problem has nothing to do with COVID or the vaccines. Fine. But I can tell you, my son's finishing his residency in Pittsburgh. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing with all the myocarditis, the cardiac arrest, the blood clots? I mean, I'm seeing this in practice. He says, I'll tell you one thing. From the nurses to the students, to the interns, the residents, fellows, and attendings, no one takes a COVID vaccine or COVID history. Nobody does. There's no mention of it on the chart.
Sure.
Remember, the vaccine was the biggest thing in the world.
Right.
You couldn't work a job. You couldn't travel. Now suddenly you potentially have a problem and no one documents it.
Yeah.
You couldn't get into the Super Bowl to watch Tom Brady. Remember his last Super Bowl when he played for the Bucs? Unless you showed you had a vaccine. But now you come in with a vaccine blood clot and no one will ask you about it. In fact, I have patients who have gone to the Mayo Clinic. I can pick on the Mayo Clinic a little bit because I've given grand rounds there. The chief of cardiology, they're trained under me. And I've had a patient go to the Mayo Clinic, huge blood clot in his leg, about 2 weeks after COVID. And he said, listen, I'm concerned my blood clot is due to COVID, which causes blood clots. Mayo Clinic said, no, we don't know what caused your blood clot, but it has nothing to do with COVID.
How do you know?
Well, why are they trying to defend the infection?
Right.
There are hundreds, if not thousands, of papers showing the virus causes blood clots. Well, why would they deny that to that patient? Patients who almost every medical center will deny the vaccine is a cause. My co-author, John Leake, had a former girlfriend who was on one of the Channel Islands in the UK, like Jersey or Guernsey. She takes the vaccine on the second shot, Pfizer or Moderna, starts getting lymph node swelling in her arm and her axilla, and it keeps going and going. And it gets very concerning. It's huge lymph nodes. So they airlift her to the Royal Free Hospital in London. And all these doctors are seeing her, and they're trying all these different things. Nothing is stopping these lymph nodes from swelling. And the doctors come in. They said, listen, we've never seen this before. They took biopsies of it, what have you. But we know one thing. It's not due to the vaccines. And she said, well, wait a minute. I just took them 2 weeks ago. It started when my arm was swollen from the vaccine. Like in her mind, it's so clearly related to the vaccine. But the doctors are confident that it's not the vaccine. And, these go to the point where they advance. They crush her carotid artery. She has a stroke. And now she's permanently disabled.
No kidding.
Yes. So very similar would be on when things started to come to a head about the vaccines and autism, especially the MMR vaccine.
Right.
There's all kinds of video clips where Sanjay Gupta, who's my counterpart, I'm a frequent contributor in primetime TV too. Sanjay Gupta is on CNN saying, listen, we don't know what causes autism, but we know one thing. It's not due to the childhood vaccines. Anybody looking at
That's a bold statement.
Anybody looking at that would say, no, there's been no study that's ruled out the vaccines. None. Do you know, of all the studies that people point to where they say the vaccines don't cause autism, there's not a single study where the child's vaccine record was physically retrieved and reviewed. There wasn't a single study where the child is examined by a qualified examiner to see if they have autism. And there's not a single study that interviewed the parents to find out what's gone on. All these are sloppy studies based on automated data, ICD codes. Well, we can't see any connection here.
Right.
All of the case series where things are carefully examined, like the case of Hannah Poling, conclude the vaccines are at least a risk factor for autism. So in our McCullough Foundation analysis, we don't say cause. When we have a complex syndrome like autism, there's not a single cause, but there are risk factors. Just like there's risk factors for heart disease, combination vaccines in a susceptible child are a risk factor for autism spectrum disorder, just like taking Seroquel through the course of a pregnancy, for instance. By the way, we did examine acetaminophen. And remember when Trump and RFK and Macri and Dr. Oz and Bhattacharya, they came out September 22nd, 2025. They had a press briefing. And it was the oddest press briefing ever, where they come out and say, well, we know the cause of autism. Oh, really? What is it? And Trump goes, well, it's acetamin. How do you look over his shoulder? How do you pronounce this?
Yeah.
And someone goes, well, he goes, Tylenol. Yeah, it's Tylenol. And then Trump, classic Trump, he can't stay on message, right? So after he says, well, Tylenol, if a pregnant woman takes Tylenol, that could be it. And then Trump, within a few minutes later, says, well, the real problem is the vaccines. The kids are taking too many vaccines, so he can't stay on message. RFK looks nauseated. Macri, all these guys know they're committing fraud. And they get up there and say, listen, it's due to Tylenol. And in 2024, there was a huge study from Sweden published in JAMA. And they examined every single mother and every single dose of Tylenol taken during pregnancies. And they even had mothers they had 20 years of data, even mothers that had more than one child. So they had siblings where maybe during one pregnancy she had a headache and took some Tylenol. The other pregnancy she didn't take a single capsule. And let me tell you, the final analysis, 0 connection with Tylenol. 0. So it's a fraud. It was so RFK, Trump, Macri, Bhattacharya, and Oz came out and defrauded America. They should have come out and said, listen, we don't have an answer. Dr. McCullough is going to have one in a month.
Right.
So by the way, the CDC and HHS was supposed to have an answer on this decades ago. They've got a $9 billion budget at the CDC, 12,000 employees, a lot like me, very competent people. A lot of my fellow residents were CDC officers. And in decades, they can't do a single report on what is behind the autism epidemic. They have an autism spectrum network research study where they keep saying it's getting worse, it's getting worse. And you know the conclusions of their papers are? It's getting worse, everybody. We should plan for more special needs education and things for these children. That's their conclusion.
Wow. Again, downstream treatments, not early outpatient treatments. Yeah.
Nobody's saying to get ahead of it. I think it's interesting. Do you know the autism advocacy networks? All of them, they deny any connection of the vaccines to autism. I wonder who's funding them.
Yeah, that's unusual. You would think they would at least ask the question.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually they joined. Oh, we're convinced. And autism has a dark connection to another big controversy, huge controvery.
I don't know if this episode can handle any more controversies.
Oh, this is big. This came out of nowhere.
It's juicy.
You know what? Transgenderism.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes. Yes.
There went the comment section.
Well, listen. When you were growing up, were there any kids in your class that were
Zero.
transgender?
I was also homeschooled, but no, I don't know
Zero.
of any. Yeah.
Zero. I went to high school here in Texas. Zero.
Mm-hmm.
I went to college. Zero. Medical school. Zero. Residency. Zero. None.
Mm-hmm.
None. And then suddenly it's an explosion of transgenderism everywhere.
I'm looking forward to that study.
Okay. So, I started to ask the question, what child would actually even do this to themselves? Hopefully the parents would protect them and never let this happen, but what child would do this? Would any normal child do this? The answer is autistic kids. And so the Dutch were publishing on this. They're saying, wait a minute, these kids showing up for these transgender clinics, they have autism. So they have trouble with social interactions. They feel ostracized. And even kids, and some autistic kids are very intelligent because there's a spectrum, right? The one thing they almost all have trouble with is dating. So, for instance, you've heard of Jenny McCarthy, right? Jenny McCarthy. And I had a chance to have her on my show, and we interviewed. And she's done incredibly well with an autistic kid to get him mainstreamed. He's still in his 30s. He lives at home. But I always ask the autistic parents, how are they doing with dating? She goes, no, he's not there yet. So opposite sex, and so they're very suggestible. So you can see an autistic kid struggling in school. He's not the high school quarterback. She's not the cheerleader. They feel a little off. And then they have a teacher or a counselor that says, maybe the problem is you're in the wrong body. Maybe you're a different sex. And so they're easily seduced down this pathway of transgenderism.
There's certainly a nurture component. I think that's apparent.
But autism is the base. A normal kid wouldn't do this. And so so here we go. So, excessive vaccination linked to the autism epidemic linked to the transgender crisis.
Wow. That is not where I was expecting this to go. But you make some interesting observations. And what I like about how you present is that I think you quote more studies than you quote just talking. I mean, these studies like a preacher knows a Bible.
Well, I take it seriously. But prior to this, any academic physician who engages in a discussion, they should be able to locate in their mind a first author. They should be well published themselves. That's kind of what we do in our field. And I mentioned that time where I testified in the House just ahead of Fauci. One of the things I asked the panel, I think I asked them, on camera, is I said, listen, you've been grilling me for 3 hours. I've quoted dozens and dozens of studies, first author, journal, year. I said, you just had Anthony Fauci. How many studies did Fauci quote in your inquisition? Zero.
Sure.
Zero. And I know Scott Atlas. Scott and I were chosen by The Hill, which is the most widely read journal in Washington, to write op-eds the first year of the pandemic. We were the only doctors doing it. And he was writing about masks and lockdowns. I was writing about early treatment, viral spread. And then, my final op-ed was questioning the vaccines. But Scott wrote a book about his 9 months in the White House. Completely incompetent as a doctor. In fact, Fauci doesn't even understand some big medical words. And there was a couple of times where Scott mentioned some word, and Fauci couldn't pronounce it, and he corrected him, and Fauci became livid at Dr. Scott Atlas. And Scott said, wait a minute, this guy's a total fraud. He's completely incompetent.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand. And a lot of people think, well, he's so crafty and this and that. That no, he's actually probably an incompetent doctor. He's an incompetent researcher. He just has been in kind of a government lackey all these years. But the one thing he did, and again, mind-blowing, is towards the end, he approaches Biden in Biden's compromised mental state. And Fauci gets a preemptive 10-year period of clemency or a pardon for crimes he knows he committed.
Mm-hmm.
That's never happened.
Yeah.
To get a pardon ahead of time to cover you. So, we're living in a time that is mind-blowing. If anybody says they trust the government with everything we've covered on this podcast, with the lead person for the pandemic response getting 10-year pardon for the crimes he committed that have not yet been pursued, they've lost their mind. So
Matt, you're speaking to a millennial. We've lost trust in the government several crises ago.
We're done. We're done at this point in time.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why we formed the Wellness Company. The Wellness Company has the lead product for people who've taken the vaccine or long COVID. It's called the Ultimate Spike Detox, medicinal grade, high dose nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin. Virtually everybody should be on this. The labeled indication is, 2 capsules twice a day. Help people get this clear, this built-up spike protein from the infection and from the vaccine. I'll leave this with you. The Wellness Company essentially has, and there's the McCullough Protocol, base spike protein detoxification. It's the only science-backed, evidence-based approach. I do prescribe drugs in addition to this, but this is pretty much, if you go on Amazon right now, multiple companies make this. Multiple companies. So, and we didn't patent it. I think it's fine. I just don't want them to use my name on other brands because I'm a corporate officer of the Wellness Company. But, we've had a meeting with HHS and Robert F. Kennedy. I literally said, listen, if there's another pandemic, the Wellness Company will respond to the pandemic. We'll outfit the country with treatment kits and what's needed. Yeah. Don't wait for the government. And the Wellness Company has got such a huge customer base, a huge following, presence in the media. You see our commercials on TV. And the bottom line is, people will pay to get through the pandemic. Government should pay, I think. But if they don't, we will take care of it. We've already handled the bird flu crisis. We made bird flu kits for all the farmers. We sent it out. We taught them about nasal sprays and gargles. We ended the bird flu pandemic. We ended the monkeypox, which Biden declared as a national crisis because of our presence in the media, and said, listen, we don't need to vaccinate for this. And we the Wellness Company essentially educated people about monkeypox, and we ended this. We ended bird flu. We will end the next pandemic as a company of dedicated doctors and public figures, not the government.
Wow. That sounds so empowering, I think, because I know a lot of patients, myself included, don't want to wait on some stumble of the government to hurt us. No, we need to educate ourselves, take the opportunity, listen to people like Dr. McCullough who are actually doing the research, actually know what goes on behind the scenes, and know when things are going wrong, not as they've traditionally gone, and they can sense that, hey, this is not business as usual. Let's get out there and make a difference for ourselves, for our family, and that's really what it's going to take, just like the original Americans did.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, listen, in wrapping it up, make sure you kind of follow all of our work, follow Dr. Dustin and great podcast. Get a copy of Courage to Face COVID-19 as well as Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. These are on Amazon. Our first book, by the way, Amazon tried to ban it for about 12 days. We had to get a big legal push to get it back up. Since when do you ban a written work of art? Make sure you tune in for America Out Loud, McCullough Report, as well as Pulse, where we take your questions.
Awesome.
And
we'll put those links in the description.
The Substack is thefocalpoints.com, and that's free. And millions of people read Substack every day, and they give an update, usually a key critical article or an interview. I cover the biomedical sphere. Nicholas Holscher from University of Michigan covers epidemiology and other aspects of environmental health. And John Leake actually covers geopolitics. And so people are turning to independent media. You turn on TV right now, and all the guys are saying the same thing. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yeah.
You know that it's in lockstep with the government. And very importantly, support McCullough Foundation, McCulloughFND.org. It's a not-for-profit organization. It funds our office in Dallas, our media operations, all of our travel. I've given hundreds and hundreds of live in-person programs across the country to crowds of thousands of people. And through the time of this great controversy, I uniquely, myself and a few people, have stood at an open mic and answered people's questions. Do you know no one in the government has done that? No one has stood at an open mic. Not Trump, not Biden, not Robert F. Kennedy. No one has faced the public on an open mic and answered the questions like I did today.
Yeah.
I've done it hundreds of times. I'll continue to do it because I think it's very important that we do need leadership in times of crisis like this. And by the way, throughout the history of the world, the leadership in a time of crisis never comes from the government or an orthodoxy. Never. Do you know that in the setting of Spanish flu, it wasn't like Harvard did anything. The government didn't do anything. Woodrow Wilson didn't even mention the Spanish flu. The point is, in bubonic plague and other things, the orthodoxy back in that time was the church. The church did nothing. The innovation in the setting of a controversy or crisis, innovation and solutions will always come from outside the orthodoxy, from courageous people who are willing to take risks, sometimes at great personal risk, but also willing to take intellectual and professional risks to help others. And if I've done anything in my career, I've played a role in this time of great controversy.
There's no doubt about that. Dr. McCullough, thank you so much for being here today again, sharing your experience and inspiring me, and I'm sure generations of physicians to follow. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you on the next show.